Hello, and welcome to Partners Beyond Parenthood, the podcast that helps new parents thrive without losing themselves. In today's episode, I am joined by Sanskriti Nigam. She's actually someone I met quite a few years ago. I have just been put back in touch with her, and I'm so excited to share everything with you today on financial freedom, financial literacy, her journey as a mom working in corporate, and I would love for you to just introduce yourself very briefly to the listeners here today.
Sure. Thanks, Emma. My name is Sanskriti Nigam. I have a little 2-year-old, which I would say he's the genesis of all of this financial freedom things that happen because I suppose when I had him, I basically started thinking about like my life and what did it look like, what it was going to look like after I went back to work after maternity leave, and was kind of like, I'm not really happy with this picture, I suppose. But yeah, in addition to being a mum, I am a tax director for a Big Four firm. I do a few other things on the side as well, but I also basically work with predominantly South Asian women, but it's open to everybody around personal finance literacy, so coaching, financial wellness, and kind of having a financial mindset. So that's what brought us, I guess, into connection today.
Exactly. And I was doing a little bit of research, and it seems like you've become quite successful in your corporate journey. How has this journey been for you in general?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, okay, so being South Asian immigrant in the UK, there are there are just a few directions you can go into kind of that are accepted by most of the South Asian community. So I chose one of them, which was to become an accountant. I would actually say like it's been long, it's been tough, and I'm very proud of myself to say that I have managed to make a success of it. But I think that obviously it comes with its own, drawbacks. It's a career that's it's very good for people who have a goal in mind and have a target in mind, which is to become as senior as possible. But
Hmm.
if you are in any way or shape or form like slightly different to that and want to veer in a different direction, then I've at least felt my experience has been that it's a little bit difficult and perhaps, that side of life and being able to nurture like maybe a more creative side or basically a side that's different to your 9 to 5 isn't something that's necessarily um there's necessarily a lot of time for. So that's why I'm trying to kind of balance those things out. I think I've just come to the point, which I think a lot of people do, right? When they become parents, you have a bit of an epiphany and you're like, hey, what does my life look like? How does it fit with a child in it? Like, how does my corporate career, how's this going to work kind of thing?
Right. All of a sudden, you kind of find a different kind of purpose.
Right, 100%, absolutely. And I think that's a much better way of describing what I just said, right?
No, everyone can describe it differently, and purpose is just a key word, I guess, that some people will use. But I find it very fascinating when I was looking through everything, and where you've gotten to. I think what I heard is you're the youngest director currently at EY, which is amazing. Congratulations. I absolutely love seeing that when, women, especially mothers, can be so ambitious, motivated, and get to such stages. Um, and now you're also doing a side hustle, which I think is incredible. Or two, I guess you're also doing, you're working essentially for free for a SaaS company, I think is what you'd mentioned to me
Correct. Yeah,
earlier.
yeah, yeah.
Um, so many questions around that. How do you manage your time as a mother and all these different endeavors?
I mean, honestly, it is tough. I won't sugarcoat it, and I feel like I'm going through like a bit of a phase of life where I'm kind of I you're almost weighing up like what keeps the lights on versus what lights the fire inside of you, right?
Mhm.
Um, it takes a huge amount of organization, I won't lie, and a husband who is incredibly supportive and helpful and kind of aligned with my goals and what I want to do. And as you say, actually, like the purpose of what I want, which is not necessarily to be doing a 9 to 5 until I'm 60, 65.
Mhm.
And that's actually a really good segue into the whole financial conversation because that's literally how it all came about. Because I think I was on maternity leave and I basically was talking to my husband and I was like, this can't be like life, right? This can't be it. You have kids, You're doing your 9 to 5 until retirement when you're 60, 65. You maybe turn up to your kids' stuff, maybe you don't. You have a whole load of calls in between meetings, whatever, whatever. And like that's just it. That's life, right? There's
Right.
nothing else to it.
Hmm.
You get a few holidays in between, but then,
Yeah.
so what is that? I basically just spent last year and this year kind of adopting a build mindset that I was like, I'm gonna have to do things that make me uncomfortable and bring out all those like emotions, that anxiety, pressure, self-doubt, in order to get to the point where I'm like, I know this is what I want to do, and I know that I've done the soul searching to understand it.
Hmm.
It takes a lot, but I'm so glad that I started this journey, and I genuinely would encourage anybody who's kind of, if you're at that pivotal moment in your life, like you're at a bit of a crossroads, try and take it as a sign to do some soul searching if you can, and not just kind of accept the status quo and like, oh, well, this is my life, this is how it's going to be.
Hmm. Did you get into these side hustles, or essentially, like, I know it's kind of part of what you do as well, like, been in
Mm.
within finance, I'll say. Is that something that happened more while you were on maternity leave, or is this something you were building before, but during that leave, you kind of really got into that mindset?
So with like personal finance, I've always been one of those people who's like, okay, what's the best credit card to get? Where do I get like the air miles, la, 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 like all that kind of stuff. And I would do it for myself a lot. And I would talk to friends and I would say to them, like, oh, you should do these things. Like if you're going abroad, take this card out in order to pay no fees and
Hmm.
whatever. Like that this was always very much like a part of my life.
Hmm.
Um, and then I think when I was on maternity leave, I feel like in the last few years, at least, I've seen so many people who have like this 9 to 5, and then they had these side hustles that they were also monetizing. And I honestly didn't know like where to even begin with it. And then I came across a post. Obviously the algorithm gods were like shining down on me that day, because literally the post was like, the best way to start a side hustle and monetize as fast as possible is to do something that either one you're already doing or that you enjoy doing. And it seems really obvious, but I mean, I don't think I'm, you know, stupid.
I don't
it
think
just
so.
hadn't it just hadn't like such an obvious thing hadn't clicked to me. And I was like, hey, do you know what? When it comes to personal finance, like at that point also, I was looking into investing. I was looking into investing for my son. I was looking into becoming a property investor. Like there was a whole bunch of stuff that I was already doing. And I was like, okay, one thing I'd realized was there really weren't many accounts or people who, one, were in my age group, or two, in my position, like being a parent, right? And three, who looked like me,
Hmm.
actually sharing this knowledge online.
Hmm.
And the whole kind of, when it comes to financial security and financial mindset, being part of an immigrant like ancestry line plays a huge part in that. And there
Hmm.
just wasn't enough. I don't feel, I still don't feel there isn't enough talked about it, or isn't talked about enough rather.
Hmm.
And that's where, so it really, the account came to be um only during my maternity leave, but it was
Hmm.
something I was already doing before, and I just basically decided this is a skill I already had. It wasn't something I had to build or like learn or anything. So I decided to jump into this, and actually, yeah, it's been great. It's been super rewarding more than anything.
Hmm. Rewarding in what way?
Like just the number of women who I've spoken to in the and I think I've just crossed my year anniversary since setting up the account, and
Congrats.
thank you. And the number of women I've spoken to who, they're being helped on like, whether it's like little tips and tricks, or we've had like in-depth conversations about becoming property investors, or we've had in-depth conversations about their plans to retire early, stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing. And I think what's so incredible in our day and age is just like, how social media enables that, to be able to learn from others and like get actually so much knowledge to how you actually can be financially free.
Mm,
My husband and I, we used to speak about the three freedoms, but I think ultimately financial freedom is the one that leads to the rest, which is so financial freedom, location freedom, and time freedom. But once you
mm,
kind of have the financial freedom, the others can fall into place depending on how you play your
yeah,
cards or how you want to live your life, right? Um,
absolutely.
so no, it's absolutely incredible. We've also been following in general like a lot more about financial literacy, and I just think it's absolutely amazing and necessary for more people, like you said, to really demonstrate within people of color and just other kinds of people that it is possible, right? Like you don't need to be a white rich man.
Absolutely, absolutely. Don't need to be a finance bro to like be the only one who's an investor.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
And I think the pitfall that so many people don't get there is because they might
Yeah.
have the knowledge, but actually like putting that into action is, one of the biggest steps. What else have you learned for yourself through that process?
Oh, yeah. I became really, really intentional about my own investor journey, probably like last spring or last summer, but actually took actions. So like kind of had a plan in my head and then took actions based on that plan, probably, yeah, around a year ago as
Okay.
well. And I would say like the last 12 months, no exaggeration, I've completely changed my life.
Okay.
From the outside, I don't think anyone would necessarily know, right? Because I'm
Hmm.
still working the same corporate job. A mum, still living in the same house, whatever. But like, I invest in the stock market. I am a property investor. I'm trying to scale my property portfolio as we speak. In terms of knowledge and understanding how to invest in property, I actually even remember even like my sister-in-law, she came to visit us last spring, so spring 2023, and she was talking to us about things like, refinancing and remortgaging and equity and property and stuff like that. And I was at the time like, I have no idea honestly what she's talking about. Like I just didn't understand it. Um, and now, like, fast forward to this time, 2024, like, I'm doing all of those steps. It's probably like knowledge. That's the biggest thing. Like, I've just immersed myself as much as possible. And as I say, like, being really intentional about what I want to do. So having those goals to that I'm going to be work optional in my 40s. I'm no longer going to need to work, right? Whether I choose to work or not, that's different, but it's not going to be because I need the money or I need the salary or whatever. Um, and the empowerment that you feel, that's what I mean when I say, like, I don't know if people from the outside would necessarily see it, but I can feel it so much in myself. Like, even when I make day-to-day decisions now, like, I feel that the journey to financial freedom has changed me as a person for the better.
Hmm.
And that's also another reason why, like, I really want to share it with other people because I'm like, I want everyone to genuinely feel this way. Like, average people who do 9 to 5s and you're kind of taught your entire life, like, you're under the rule of your boss or your manager or you're this or you're that. Actually, it doesn't have to be like that. You
Yeah.
could, if you play your cards right, you could end up being wealthier than said manager or boss.
Hmm.
Because there are so few people who actually understand personal finance. So there could be someone who's earning, I don't know, over $100,000 and they're still living paycheck to paycheck compared to somebody who's earning $50,000, investing half of that salary every single month, and they're able to retire in their 40s. And they're like, well, that boss of mine who was earning double my salary is still working until he's 65.
Right. Absolutely. When did you start your personal investing journey and what sparked the initiative?
Okay, so I can remember this really clearly because I would say pre-COVID, there were people I knew who were talking about investing and like, the stock market and stuff like that. And it was, I think, something I was always aware of. It's actually funny, like I can tell you exactly when I started doing it. I can tell you what I did, but I don't know what it was or
Hmm.
who it was that put the idea in my head that it's important to start investing.
Hmm.
There was a point in like 2019, 2020-ish time that I started listening to investing podcasts,
Hmm.
or like finance podcasts, right? And had the same feeling that a lot of people have before they get into investing, like, oh my God, I'm really scared. Investing is for the rich.
Hmm.
I have to have loads of money to start investing. Oh, is it kind of like gambling? Like, what are the chances I'm going to lose all the money?
Hmm.
All of these questions. I probably could have started investing earlier than when I actually did, but I had all these things in my head, and because I didn't have guidance, I wasn't taught financial literacy growing up. My family are not investors in stock market or property or anything like that. Because of that, I think there was a lot more risk averse mindset associated with what I was doing. I guess I kind of just felt like it was something I needed to do.
Hmm.
And then probably like 2018, 2019, I kind of started thinking in my head, like, "Ah, I really want to start investing." So in December of 2021, sitting in Heathrow Airport, and I'd set myself a goal that year that I was like, before the end of the year, I'm going to start investing. I'm going to put some money in the pot. And obviously now that pot is growing.
It's always said that you can do this when you have even little money, right? Like you can start with 5, I guess, pounds or dollars or euros, wherever you're based. It really just takes little, and it's a lot of it is the mindset, right? Starting off very small and realizing that you can just like automate even just a tiny amount, but keep adding. Like the most important thing is really developing a mindset to invest, not just in your future, but in yourself right now, because that's what it is, right? It's kind of
Absolutely.
understanding how do you manage your money, etc. But do you think that you still need to go through a certain kind of financial journey before you can really do that?
Yeah,
Where is
yeah,
that
yeah.
that block, or how would you best advise someone to be like, no, start now, you can actually do it?
Mm, mm, mm. No, I think it's a really good question, and I would almost say the answer is like two-pronged, because there's one point which is around the mindset that you need to tackle to start investing, but also there's a point around um being responsible with your personal finances before you jump into investing. So quite a lot of the times, like when I'm on Brown Women Wealth, which is my page, if I talk about my investment journey and I talk about like the size of my employer pension pot or the size of my investments or whatever, my DMs will like suddenly start going crazy where people are like, how did you get into investing? Like, what would you recommend? Where should I invest? Blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would say, right, with the two-pronged bit, there's an education that everyone, no matter what, right, even if you think that you know everything and now you can start investing because you know everything, you don't know everything. Everyone will go through that.
Yeah.
The responsibility point, I would say, is before you start investing, right, there are a few things that you should think about. So one is if you're employed, make sure that you are maxing out any employer-based pensions. So wherever you are in the world, right? Most likely, most large companies will offer something. That's essentially free cash if you're not taking the benefit, right? Because they will match any contributions you make to said pension.
Mm-hmm.
These companies will match that value. So see how much they match to and make sure you've equally matched, that you're taking advantage of as much free money as possible from them.
Mm-hmm.
Then you should think about creating an emergency fund for yourself. Now, depending on where you are, stage of your life, but obviously, the people we're talking to who are parents,
Mm-hmm.
um, 6 to 12 months of your like necessary expenses. And obviously, you can imagine when you have kids, it becomes even more critical to make sure you have this.
Yep.
Um, 6 to 12 months in an account, ideally a high interest account. So I have mine in a high interest savings account, so it's accessible when and if I ever need it,
Mm-hmm.
but it's also growing at the same time. Like on my on in my emergency fund, actually, I just posted about this. I've made like just shy of £2,000 just in interest. It's not
Amazing.
doing anything. It's like the best feeling, right? Passive income, truly
Yeah.
being paid my money to sit in an account.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's the second thing. And then the third thing is if you have high interest credit card debt, make sure you get rid of that, because the interest on credit cards, which they can be anywhere from like 10 to 20%, depending on the returns on your investments, that will just completely cut any gains that you get on any stock market investments.
Yeah.
So I'd call them like, the responsibility building blocks of personal finance.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure you have these three things sorted, and then you can think about, okay, what's the next step of my journey?
Right.
Right. And it's
Mm-hmm.
almost like the evolution of becoming an investor, but just make sure you've got your bedrock sorted,
Mm-hmm.
and then you're able to make decisions from a position of power rather than a position of desperation.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great advice. And that leads me on to ask you the next question. Finances are very different with every single couple, right? And here I'd be
Mm.
curious if you're willing to share. How do you manage your finances with your husband? Was this something that you spoke about before you got married, before you had a kid? Did it change after that? Do you see any drawbacks or benefits to sharing finances or keeping it separate?
Yeah. The last question is quite a polarizing question, right?
Yeah.
But okay, learning from our situation, I would say we didn't talk enough about finance before we got married.
Hmm.
I knew like what my personal finance situation was. He knew what his was. I would say we bore the brunt of that in the first few years of our marriage because he had a spending mindset and I had a saving mindset.
Hmm.
Neither is right and neither is wrong.
Hmm.
And actually, I would say like we both probably were extremes of the situation. So we're kind of like, in a way, both wrong because you need to have a bit of balance, right? If you have a saver mindset, but you're trying to invest for a future of freedom, the truth is, if you've never learned to spend your money, you're never going to learn to spend it later once you're free. You're just going
Hmm.
to have a pile of money that you aren't doing anything with. And if you spend it all, you're never going to get there in the first place.
Hmm.
So, if you are in a couple and you've not had those conversations, what becomes critical is your ability to resolve and like conflict resolve, because money does create problems, right? And
Hmm.
be able to just kind of have the conversation openly and be like, okay, this is what I want to achieve out of my money, and this is how much I have to be able to do that, and this is how what you want to achieve out of your money, and this is how much you have. Now,
Hmm.
does it make sense for us to pool it together, or does it make sense to keep it apart? And depending on whatever stage you are, whether you're boyfriend and girlfriend or husband wife, or partners, etc., you need to feel comfortable enough to have the conversation about finances, appreciating and recognizing that you are going to hit stumbling blocks.
Hmm.
If your partner or you are not willing to have a conversation about finances, that in itself should kind of raise a bit of a flag to you. But how you resolve through that is, how you mitigate that flag.
Hmm.
My husband and I now specifically, we pool all of our finances. And I really fundamentally believe that if you are in a situation where you're able to put finances together for a combined and aligned future goal, that's genuinely a massive personal finance life hack.
Hmm.
Because what you can do to scale when the two of you are working towards the same North Star is like completely different to an individual. Now we are completely on the same page when it comes to our finances. Like any large expenses, any actually not even large expenses, I would say all expenses we discuss to
Yeah.
make sure that we have enough to be able to then hit our monthly and then annual kind of goals towards our future freedom.
Right. As for goals, is that something that you do once a year, once a quarter, or how would you say you guys manage that?
So I would say that the exercise that we went through was last year we did a couple of things. Bearing in mind, last year was when, as I say, like we started becoming really intentional with our personal finances.
Hmm.
Um, we wrote a 5-year like manifestation plan,
Hmm.
and we did not consult one another when we were writing it. It was like each other's dream, right?
Hmm.
And nothing was off the table. You could put
Hmm.
anything on there. And then we wrote like a 5-year, I guess, more realistic goal plan. And it wasn't just personal finance. A lot of it was about the type of life we wanted to be living. We do a finance date actually on a monthly basis. So
Okay.
whether that looks like dinner together, or it's like a, because we've got a son, like a small boy, so it's a breakfast date sometimes as well.
Yeah.
You got to do what you got to do, right?
Yeah.
And the thing is, I think one massive misconception with money is people think money and emotions don't go well together. I don't agree with that at all. Like, the whole like money doesn't buy you happiness stuff. Like, yeah, it doesn't buy you happiness, but it gives you the opportunity to attain all the things that potentially can bring you joy and happiness, right?
Yeah.
So we when we talk about finances, we talk about everything connected to it, like how we're feeling about decisions that we're making as well. So it's not just only a decision made with our head, it's like head and heart always.
Yeah. I love the fact that you guys talk about that also once a month. I think so many people just don't talk about it because money is so
100%.
taboo, right? It's really crazy,
Absolutely.
especially like, masculine, feminine, like just those divides and everything. And it's really a shame because I feel like if you can't talk about it at home, of course it's going to be more difficult out in the world, right?
100%.
So no, definitely for those listening, talk to your partners if you haven't. Continuously talk
No,
about it.
and Sab, this point that you just made just now about the whole masculine and feminine thing, like it's really interesting, right? Because I actually got a DM like a few months ago where someone basically was implying that does my husband feel really emasculated by how I am, like in terms of money? And I was like, that's a weird question, first of all. But I was like,
But
okay, but
reflective of our,
yeah,
society.
exactly, exactly. The truth is, it's always been that the man is the breadwinner, right? The man is the one who controls the finances, who does all anything to do with money, he does it. and the
Mm-hmm.
woman is the one who kind of goes along with the journey.
Mm-hmm.
And I really, really was thinking about it, and like, all this stuff about like your soft feminine era, blah 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 blah. And
Yeah.
I was like, it's really interesting because I think when you become a mum, at your very core, for a lot of us, the most intense need to protect and nurture comes out.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what that may have looked like, I don't know, 100 years ago, obviously was one thing. But what it looks like now, with women who are building careers, women who are earning their own money, women who are independent, financially, personally, etc., the ability to nurture and protect looks like your ability to provide
Yeah.
for your child.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to personal finance, I don't think there should be anything gender related when it comes to it. Like, anybody and everybody should be able to level up in terms of financial literacy, and should be able to feel free and able to educate themselves about something that's fundamentally required to put food on the table, to keep the lights on at home,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
There's nothing to do with being masculine or feminine or whatever.
Right. Brown, white, anything.
Right, right. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And um, I'm very curious. So, in terms of investing into your child's future, you've kind of touched upon the fact that both of you seem to have switched your habits a little bit in terms of money after you had a child. What are one of the things you can do for your child? So, do you open a savings account? Do you open an investment account? What are the best strategies, do you think, to invest into their future?
Um, okay, so practical things that all parents can do, right? In a lot of countries, obviously I can't speak for all of them, but certainly in the UK, you can open investment accounts. There's a tax advantaged investment account for a person under 18. It's called a junior ISA, individual savings account, and basically you can buy shares or whatever through the stock market in your ISA, and you can make them an investor from as young as like a day old kind of
Hmm.
situation, right?
Yeah.
Um, and you can keep investing into that account, and the money will grow based on your gains in the stock market, plus the fact that it's compound as well. It will continue growing, and they'll gain access to it when they're 18. That's one thing you can do. You can also create just like a cash savings account as well with a high interest, and that will continue to compound as well. Obviously, I suspect that if you're not already like an investor, people are more comfortable with doing cash savings in comparison. But obviously, if you can invest for your child, then that's the way to make that money kind of like fly.
Yeah.
So these are obviously practical tips that you can do. Um, Things that we do ourselves. So for example, when my son has had his birthday last year, we told all the family like don't buy gifts and stuff like that because we could give him all the toys and things like that. Whatever money you were going to spend on birthday gift, give it to us and we'll invest it in his name. It's too early right now, but my plan is to also, do things like giving him pocket money and making him understand how he can split his pocket money, in the future, basically creating those habits. I also really want to like teach him entrepreneurial habits from a young age.
Hmm.
Again, like as part of this journey, I feel like I've read so much about people who have an entrepreneurial mindset, and the fact that, what really differentiates them from people who aren't is the fact that they had an idea and they just were willing to take the risk to go with it. And
Hmm.
if you're willing to make mistakes and learn from that early,
Hmm.
right? I think that really can change how your life ends up being. And what better way than to be able to give him that parachute when he's at home, right? To be able
Yeah.
to make those mistakes and get that experience, etc. So, it's not just about giving them money and investing it. It's also really critical to make sure you give them the personal finance education to go alongside it.
Well, I feel like your son is in really good hands.
I certainly hope so. I certainly hope so.
No, that's incredible. And I don't know if you've come across the book yet, but it's called Raising an Entrepreneur
No, I
by
haven't.
Margot
I feel
someone.
like I'm
But
going to read it.
yeah, I was going to say it sounds like maybe something that could be interesting. Because I'd agree. I think, the education system, especially, and I think I can speak more, not for the UK maybe, but for Europe as a whole, um, is very much like, you go to school and then it's kind of like this herd mentality where you follow like the rules and everything, and that's kind of how it is.
Yeah, yeah,
You get out of school, you graduate, you apply for a job, you pay your taxes, and you kind of continue
absolutely.
this cycle. So I think this mindset of teaching your kids at home this, the financial education, which maybe that will change, maybe the curriculum will pick up and kind of be like, these are actual vital tools that children need nowadays in their day-to-day life. Maybe that will start coming in as a module or something. That would be incredible. But no, amazing to have it at home, because if they can't get it in school, where else, right?
When I was first buying my residential property that I'm living in right now, the whole mortgage concept, like I had zero idea about what to do, how to do it. And it's funny because you kind of think like these sort of life skills, like if you don't get taught it at school, and you're not learning at home, like who is the world expecting will teach you,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
But one thing I would say is I do feel like kids today are a lot more um clued in with stuff. In fact, like we actually live opposite a school, and sometimes like when we're going to pick up my son from nursery and stuff, we hear some of the conversations. And like recently, I've actually like I've heard people talking about Airbnb arbitrage. Like young kids, I'm talking about like
Mhm.
below 18, talking about Airbnb arbitrage. Like I didn't even know what arbitrage meant.
Wow.
Right? And so
Yeah.
yesterday this kid was talking about he was talking about mortgages and something to do with like I mean this is literally me just eavesdropping into his conversation, but like mortgages and like he was talking about the fact that how you can qualify to get a mortgage and stuff, and I was like, what the hell are you talking about? That you're I mean, but again, more power to him, right? Like if he figures it out and he learns how to become a property investor when he's young, like he's on the road to financial freedom probably in his 30s.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hopefully the the market will stay good for that. But yeah, absolutely right. The mindset is there, and that's kind of the most important thing. So, um, the question that I have for you is,
Mm.
when we as parents want to invest into the future of our children to hopefully give them that parachute, or, like we want to give them a life where, I think you've also said this before, where it's kind of for them to thrive and not just survive. Um, how do you instill like resilience and determination, in these kids if they know that they already have something to fall back on?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and I got asked it some time ago as well, actually, about like, what the fact that I didn't have a parachute has obviously made me like as tenacious as I now am. And I can't say that if I had had a parachute, would it be different? I think that statistically, children who you go to university, as an example, you go to university, you're already like burdened with a huge amount of debt in relation to that education. And if your family aren't able to pay that debt for you, or you're not able to pay that debt easily, um, you take that debt with you for a certain number of years. Obviously, that's accumulating interest. Like you're already on the back foot when you basically start life.
Hmm.
So a child who leaves university with debt versus no debt, you can already see there's a disparity. That's
Hmm.
like the equity versus equality kind of
Yeah.
debate that's already coming in, right? Now, what ensures that the child who had no debt continues to stay the steps ahead is the personal finance education that
Hmm.
they will have received as a young person when they were living at home
Right.
or like living with their parents. Um, and I think that's what is really, really critical. And I suppose, as intentional as I am with my own investor journey, it would require me becoming a very, like, a strand of my parenting being a very intentional money education for my son so that he constantly is able to take advantage of the opportunities that I'm currently laying down for him.
Hmm.
I think that a person feeling entitled to the parachute is what means they're less resilient or less tenacious or less able to kind of like go in with the grit, right?
Hmm.
And that really comes from your parents. If you don't
Hmm.
feel the entitlement to that parachute, like, oh, well, mum and dad should be giving this to me,
Right.
then hopefully you'll be just as tenacious or going after the goal in the same way with the same grit as
Hmm.
the next person. So it's a really, I understand completely. Like it's a really difficult thing. Check back with me in 18 years
Right.
and I'll let you know whether I've been successful or not, or is my child a total spoiled brat. No, yeah, it is one thing though, legitimately, like I do think about a lot, and I would very much um is encourage enough, like more than encourage people that if you are starting this journey for yourself and you recognize that, hey, I didn't get taught it, remember that it's your responsibility as a parent now to teach your child, to set them up. Like the decision to give your child personal finance education at home versus not could be the difference of them of millions of pounds. It could be the difference between them working an additional 20 years, right, before they are able to retire. It could be the difference between them saving their mental health in a corporate job that's toxic versus being able to walk away from it because they don't need the money.
Hmm. Yeah. So you raising a child at home and giving that personal financial education, um, do you tell your child that they have this parachute?
Hmm. I okay, so my plan is this, right? I My current plan is this. Um, I'm not planning on telling him anything until he's at least 18, mostly because I have to, because the junior investment account that I've set up for him legally becomes his at that age, because I feel like 18, 16, these ages are way too young, like emotionally, to put the level of decision that all of us have had, right, in our lives, to make decisions about jobs and university degrees and stuff like that, and basically be like, right, you're now committed to the decision, this is what you have to do for the rest of your life, that's it.
Hmm.
Like I feel that that's too young, so I want to work with him, and that's also part of the personal finance education, right? I want to work with him to understand, like, what do you want to do? Where is your, like, where is your head at when you think about what money is for? Do you see it as something just to spend for like day-to-day pleasures, or do you see it as something, as a tool to grow? Now, obviously, I know how I see money,
Yeah.
and obviously, I'm hoping by that stage I've imparted enough wisdom to him so that he also sees it a certain way. But if he doesn't, the idea is to work with him to kind of get to that point so he starts to see it that way as well.
Yeah. And you'd mentioned earlier that, you'd kind of want to instill, I guess, money management by perhaps giving pocket money and maybe putting some stuff aside. How would that look? Would you then essentially be taking that part where he's like, oh, I'm going to invest that somewhere, and you would kind of do it for him, but he doesn't know where that goes? Or,
So one thing I've seen, right? So there was another mum, so her kids are obviously a lot older than mine. And what she does is, so there's the magic rule of three when it comes to personal finance, right? So you get £100, 50% of that £100 is for the things that you need. So the home in which you live, so your rent, your mortgage payments, your utility bills, your food, stuff like that, stuff you need to survive,
mhm,
basically, right? 30% is for the stuff that you want, so non-essential items like your shopping, your going out for dinners, coffee, stuff like that.
mhm,
20% is for your savings and or investments. So what she does with her kid is she gives him, let's say, for the point of this example, £10, and she splits it like that. So she
mhm,
says, okay, 50% I'm taking for your rent and your food and blah blah blah. 30% is what's left behind for the things that you want to do, and 20% we're going to save and invest. Now obviously she's actually saving and investing 70% of that pocket money,
mhm,
he or she doesn't realize, and he learns to play within the 30%.
mhm,
And that's a really, really important habit to teach children, because that means when they get older, and I don't know what it was like in Europe, but certainly for me in the UK, when I went to university, for example, I remember talking to a friend and he was saying, so you can apply for a student loan, and it's there to cover your books and education, your books and stuff like that, to kind of help your education. Fees are separate to all of this. But then also like your day-to-day living as well. And he was saying, I remember still to this day, like he was like, a lot of people go crazy in the first week that they get the student loans, and then they'll just go out and they'll spend it all and blow the money, and then the rest of and it's supposed to cover you for 3 months. So the rest of the 2.5 whatever months, they're really struggling
mhm.
because they basically have no money.
Right.
if you from a really young age have learned how to divide up your money to be financially responsible, you will never be one of those people, and that those habits will stay with you, right? It becomes really interesting as you start getting promoted, for example, in work, and you learn how to control lifestyle inflation.
Hmm.
And you can only do these things if you've learned the basics. In my situation, I was always a saver, but I've had to learn habits as an adult, and it's that much harder as an adult.
Habits are so powerful, right? And if you could start them from a young age, I think that can take you a really long ways. I have one last question for you.
Yeah.
Um, and this is in general for all the parents listening who are perhaps struggling a little bit. What have you seen as the biggest obstacle usually holding people back from becoming financially free? And what would you say to them?
Um, in, I would say the biggest obstacle is the fact that you need to look or be a certain way to be an investor. So people would think that, oh, investing is just for rich people, or I need to have a certain amount of money, or because the majority of investors they see, they look a certain way, they don't look like them, therefore they can't really relate or feel like they fit into that category kind of thing. I genuinely really do feel this. I do feel like personal finance education and being an investor, it's one of the few things in this world that, as I was saying before, it's like race, gender, ethnicity agnostic, religion, everything agnostic. Like anybody and everybody, as long as you're willing to put the time in to educate yourself so that you can make calculated decisions and take calculated risks, you can change your life potentially. And I think that it's intentionally been made to feel hard because the more people that get in on it, the less kind of lucrative or exclusive it kind of seems.
Yeah,
But it actually genuinely is as easy as that. You don't need to look a certain way. You don't need to have millions of pounds to start it. And investing isn't just for the rich, it's what made people rich.
absolutely.
So think about it that way, like basically turn your mindset on its head and recognize that you are owed just as much of a chance as the next person to go after it. And as I say, like I always say, live a life of your own choosing.
Hmm. I love that. Again, great advice. And if people would like to learn more about what you do or where they can find you, where would that be?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm on Instagram on Brown Woman Wealth. So yeah, any questions or anything that anybody wants to just talk about or discuss, please feel free to DM me. But yeah, that's where you can find me.
Great. And I'll make sure to add that in the show notes as well. Well, thank you
Thank
so much
you.
for being here and sharing everything that you have shared with us today. It's been really refreshing to hear this also from a woman um,
Oh, you're
in
so
the
welcome.
corporate space. So, again, thank you so much for being here.
No, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for tuning in and sticking around to the end. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you've just watched and enjoyed this video, I'd be so grateful for a like and if you'd hit the subscribe button. With your support, I'll be able to invite bigger guests and provide more value. If you're listening to the audio only, make sure to follow this podcast to get tips on parenting and partnership and hear inspiring stories from other parents as well. See you next week.